That was the scene at the court in the French city of Avignon on Thursday as Gisèle Pelicot arrived, surrounded by supporters and campaigners, as she waited to hear what sentences would be handed down to the 50 men who raped her, arranged by her husband who had drugged her into unconsciousness. This was the trial that had gripped France and the world coming to an end, and we will discuss it all on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and we're going to focus this entire episode on this story because what a story it is, and there's lots of implications as well. And lots of my colleagues have been covering it over the last couple of months. We're joined by Victoria Derbyshire from Newsnight, who interviewed Gisèle Pelicot's lawyer a few days ago. Hello, Victoria.
Hi, Adam.
And also we're joined from Avignon, where the events played out today, by the BBC's Paris correspondent Andrew Harding. Hi, Andrew.
Evening. Hello.
And Laura Gozzi, who is the BBC online journalist who has been running the live page on the BBC News website today. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Now, we'll dive into what's been happening in court today because there's a lot to discuss. But first of all, Vic, just to give us some sort of context here, when you were interviewing Gisèle Pelicot's lawyer last week, I'm just wondering if there's anything he said then that was just really ringing in your ears as you were watching the verdicts being handed out today.
There was. I mean, I asked Stéphane Babineau, Gisèle Pelicot's lawyer, what words he would use to describe Madame Pelicot. And he said, extraordinary, courageous, selfless, and humble. And we saw that today when she left the courtroom to the applause from all the women that were waiting for her. And she's so serene when she did her short statement and she thanked people for their support. And those adjectives that Monsieur Babineau used about her are absolutely right, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and I wonder if we should just hear a little bit of her statement now that she did to a huge crowd of journalists, including Andrew.
C'est avec une profonde émotion que je m'exprime aujourd'hui devant vous.
It is with deep emotion that I stand here speaking to you today. This trial was a very difficult ordeal for me. And at this moment, my thoughts primarily go to my 3 children, David, Caroline, and Florian. I also think of my grandchildren, because they are the future, and it is also for them that I led this fight. I also think of my daughters-in-law, Aurore and Céline. I also think of all the other families affected by this. Finally, I think of the unrecognised victims, whose stories often take place in the shadows. I want you to know that we share the same fight. By making this trial public in September, I wanted society to grapple with the issues that it raised. I never regretted this decision. I now have faith that we, collectively, can build a future in which everyone, men and women, can live in harmony, respect, and mutual understanding.
And Andrew, what was that moment like?
It was remarkable. The courthouse was absolutely packed. There was a sense, I think, of relief today that it was all over. And this sort of contrast between what was going on inside the courthouse and these crowds outside anticipating her sortie from the courthouse, like as if she was some sort of rock star. I mean, the incredible warmth that was waiting for her out there was truly remarkable, yes.
And Laura, it's interesting looking at our coverage today and on the live page. Okay, half of it has been the sort of classic court reporting you would expect around a story like this, but the other half has been about what an icon Gisèle Pelicot has become.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about how, when she first turned up here in early September, she was just a grandmother, a mother who had decided to give up her anonymity and have an open trial, but she didn't really know how it was going to play out. She certainly couldn't have predicted that it was going to get this kind of attention. And to see, to think about her climbing those steps back in September and descending them today for the last time, and seeing the kind of reaction that she sparked from society and the way she's inspired people and how much she's
has come to mean to so many of them. It's been really interesting and really remarkable.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the amazing kind of societal phenomenon that has developed around her in a minute. But Andrew, can we just rewind a little bit to the start of the day on Thursday? Just talk us through the process about what actually happened in court today.
So it started at 9:30 local time. The accused, many of them still out on bail, came in as usual through the steps just behind us here at the Palais de Justice in Avignon, still masked, many of them carrying bags of clothes for prison, knowing that it was very likely that a lot of them would get guilty verdicts and prison sentences. There was a huge scrum of media getting in. It was pretty well organised actually by the authorities, so they had overflow rooms with TVs in them so we could watch some of the proceedings. There were lots of relatives as well who had their own overflow room where many of them sat, and indeed they never got a chance to then say goodbye to their relatives when they were taken away to prison. The court started just a little bit late, and there was a lot of speculation about how quickly it was going to happen. We were thinking a few hours, and then the judge president started, and you could just see, and we were timing it, it was 20 seconds per accused. He was just delivering the verdicts very quickly, and after a few minutes we thought, all right, well, we're going to get through this in just 10-15 minutes. And then he was, as he'd made clear, having done the verdicts, he was then going to move on to sentencing, which he did very abruptly as well. So it was all over very quickly. There were gasps outside. We could hear some cheering outside when news both of Pelicot's guilty verdict, no surprise there, and also his 20-year sentence, again no surprise there, came through. There were different reactions to some of the other sentences. The fact that a lot of these men got significantly lower sentences than the prosecution had asked for. Some people asked for 12 years from the prosecution. They got 8 or less. 9 men, as I understand it, right now are not in prison. 6 of them because they've served enough time. 3 others who are being considered. I think under French law that there's a period of time when they've got a bit of leeway there. So some of the people in the courtroom, the families, were very upset. Others, some of their lawyers, were saying, no, this is a good thing. Outside, there was some frustration from some amongst the crowd who were shouting, shame.
And Laura, what's the explanation for the fact that there were different sentences for different men here, even though they were all found guilty of the same crime?
Well, broadly it had to do with whether they had a criminal record. So some of them did, and so got more, longer sentences. There were aggravating factors as well. Some of them were convicted of 3 aggravating factors, others fewer. So that's what made a difference. And then some of them have actually already spent time in pre-trial detention. So some of them have been in jail for a number of years already, and that carried some weight as well in kind of the final sentencing by the court.
And Victoria, I noticed this morning you were posting on social media and you posted the name of every single man who was sentenced today, and that is just such a cross-section of the French society, isn't it? In terms of their jobs and what their backgrounds were.
Yeah, and I think I asked the lawyer last week, I said, why is all the reporting just using the Christian name and the first letter of the surname of the men who are accused? And he said, that's just the way journalists have chosen to report it. I mean, Andrew can correct me if I'm wrong there, and Laura, of course.
After the guilty verdicts, then everybody started reporting their full names. Before that, the concern was that if some of them were found not guilty, that they would be able potentially to take legal action, and that is simply just the way it's done in France, and that is the tradition, that you don't name them fully until there is a verdict.
Interesting. And also, Vic, just the point that there was firefighters there were lorry drivers, there was a journalist, there was a DJ.
Yes. So these are people doing normal jobs. Now, and I've heard so much reporting today from commentators and presenters and so on saying, these are ordinary men. And when I asked the lawyer what kind of men are on trial, and he said, look, they might be ordinary in the sense that they do normal jobs, or they're fathers or husbands or sons. He said, but the decisions they made, the choices they make, were not ordinary. Because if you say they're just ordinary men, that implies every man would do what these men did. And he just doesn't believe that's true. He wanted them to be absolutely responsible for the choices that they had made, and they needed to take responsibility.
And this is the bit where I feel sort of a bit trepidatious, because we then have to talk about actually what happened here, and some really quite distressing details were revealed to the court over the last few weeks. Laura, where does Gisèle Pelicot's story kind of start for you?
I guess it starts on the day that she's, in November 2020, that she's called into the police station in Carpentras, near where she and her husband used to live in the south of France. And she thought she was just going in to kind of answer some questions about this upskirting that her husband had confessed doing a couple of months before. And obviously she couldn't have known when she went in that she was going to be asked questions, for police to try and find out whether she could have somehow been, consented to the things that they've seen on the videos that Dominique had taken. And I guess it's that moment when she walks into the police station and, she walks into one room and her husband walks into the other, and she doesn't know that this is the last time that she will see him, and that the next time that they will be in the same room will be 4 years later, and it will be in the courtroom right behind us. And I think that's where it all starts, her tragedy, but also really her journey.
And Andrew, we learned a lot about this website that Dominique Pelicot used to meet these other men that he then invited to their apartment to rape her.
That's right, coco.fr. It was a pretty regular website, accessed very easily by anybody, but increasingly became used by people who wanted to have swinging sex sessions, basically, with people in the neighbourhood, because that's the way the system on this site worked. There were also quite a lot of child pornography on the site, drug dealers and so on selling their wares. So it became a site with a very dark reputation, even though it was widely available and used. It's since been closed down. But Dominique Pelicot used that to recruit people, basically, for his sick fantasy. He'd started drugging his wife, experimenting on drugging his wife, and then he went on the site into a particular chat room called Without Her Knowledge and made it clear he was looking for people to come and join in this couple's fantasy, claiming that somehow, well, this is where it gets murky, because some of the accused said, well, we just thought it was a regular, well, a bit weird, but a couple's fantasy. We do this kind of thing all the time. And this time it happened to be a couple where the woman liked to pretend to be asleep or to be asleep, and then would watch the videos of what had happened to her the next morning with her husband. Now, Dominique Pelicot insists that all the accused knew exactly what was happening, that this was rape, that they knew it was rape. But throughout this trial, right to the bitter end, 35 of the accused stuck to their story, that they genuinely thought that they were going for a consensual sex game, that they were tricked by Dominique Pelicot, and that in some sense they still feel that they were tricked, even though some of them have since admitted that this was rape. They recognise it, but they don't feel that they necessarily should have known, could have known, that Gisèle was not consenting.
And that was one of the points that Gisèle Pelicot's lawyer, Stéphane Babineau, made to Victoria on Newsnight the other day there. We can hear how he explained that point.
Even having this evidence, she had to justify herself on many things. I mean, on her behavior, on her inability to discover by herself what was happening to her, which even led to the idea that she was partly responsible of some of the men falling into the alleged Dominique trick, Dominique Pelicot's plan, because some of the accused, they believe that they're the victims of what happened. She has been...
They say that, they have said that. They believe they're victims of Dominique Pelicot.
Of course. And some of them even expressed apologies to Mrs. Pelicot, but not for what they did to her, but for being victims of her husband.
And Laura, there were points though where supporters of Gisèle Pelicot and campaigners were saying it almost felt like she was on trial here, even though she absolutely was not.
Yes, exactly, and I think this is one of the very many interesting things to come out of this trial is the fact that, you know, quite early on when she was being asked all these questions, and you know, some of the defense lawyers were trying to basically make her say that yes, maybe she had somewhere along the line consented, or maybe there were evenings that she drank a bit too much, and you know, this is what it all led to. But there was this powerful moment back in September where she basically said, ever since I've been in this courtroom, I have been humiliated, I have been ashamed, I have been made to feel ashamed rather, and it's this idea that, you know, she's opened up this trial, and so the media and the public have been able to see what often goes on in rape trials, which is that the victim is made to feel like maybe they did something wrong, maybe somehow it was all their fault. And you know, I think this will be one of the things that will really stick into people's minds. This idea that, you know, there are thousands of videos and pictures that show that she could not possibly have been in a state of consent, and yet, even so, there were kind of, you know, questions over her consent, over whether she was part of it, over whether it was a game. You know, I think that a lot of people will remember that.
And Victoria, I mean, over our combined journalistic lives, we've had to cover a lot of stories about sexual assault or violence against women and girls. But it's important to note just what a sort of extraordinary thing Gisèle Pelicot has done here by waiving her anonymity, making her case about trying to, as she said, shift the shame from her onto the people who attacked her. This is quite a big deal in a story like this, isn't it?
It's huge, and it's a very personal decision. You know, I've interviewed a number of women who have waived their anonymity. And the reason Gisèle Pelicot did it is because initially she was in that courtroom mostly on her own with people who were accused of raping her, and she wanted to open it up to everybody. Her lawyer fought for those videos to be shown in open court. The presiding judge at one point, according to the lawyer, was worried that perhaps the videos would be offensive in some way or against public decency or would disrupt the proceedings of the trial. And of course, it's the rape itself that's the offensive thing, that's against public decency, not the representation of the rape or the video of the rape. So, and he said other women have opted for these open trials now, as following the example of Gisèle Pelicot.
And Andrew, I mean, what was it like when these videos were played in court?
It was very quiet for a start, and Gisèle Pelicot and Dominique Pelicot never watched them in court, although we know that Gisèle had actually been shown them before and had reached a point on her 4-year journey from that moment when her world fell apart back in 2020, that she was ready to look at the videos. And in court, what was, I think, most shocking for many of us were the sounds, the loud, audible snoring that you could hear Gisèle Pelicot as she lay on that bed. It was actually incredibly difficult to watch a lot of it, and often what was easier to listen to some extent was the descriptions that the judge president would read out before he played the videos, but they were also very shocking, in which he would detail exactly what kind of sex acts would be viewed on these particular videos.
And Laura, just looking out to that the bigger picture of French society here, because you just get the sense everyone in France is talking about this. I mean, it's impossible to say where society will go as a result of this, but are there some hints about things that might change or might be different because of all of this?
I think that might be a little bit too early to say. I think we're going to have to wait for the dust to settle on a case that really, as you say, has shocked people and that a lot of people have talked about. I don't think anyone will have been immune to it. And it will be interesting to see whether this conversation, turns political later on, whether there's some real talk about changing the French legislation around rape. and whether basically this story can actually be a catalyst for change, and doesn't just remain, a horrific story that was incredibly well covered and talked about, but it ultimately only ended up being a story like many others.
Well,
can I just
go ahead, Andrew.
On that? There were a few moments. There were a few moments, both today and before, where I think we've seen the kind of backlash that's also out there. A lot of men, frankly, don't feel like this represents France or them. There was one of the defence lawyers came out of court today. He taunted the women who were protesting. He said, "You're hysterical," and then he swore essentially at them. A couple of the accused who went in put their fingers in the air and swear in V signs or rude signs. Last night I actually interviewed one of the accused. I interviewed him through his daughter, but I also met him. And he really represented, I think, the view, certainly amongst most of the accused, that this was unfair, that they thought they were doing something different. They didn't understand and didn't believe that they were guilty of rape, that the consent issue had somehow been twisted, that they'd been tricked. And I think you will find a lot of people in France, particularly a lot of men still, who will not be convinced by the arguments that we've heard here. That said, I also agree that this has been such an extraordinary media moment, and everyone's discussing it, that clearly there's an opportunity here for a lot of people to be challenged and for minds to change.
And Andrew, I was listening to your podcast that you made about the case, which is available right now on BBC Sounds, and it's called 51 Frenchmen. And there's a bit there where you speak to the mayor of the area near where Gisèle Pelicot lived, and he sort of almost plays this whole thing down.
He did. It was a very strange meeting because initially he was, I think, embarrassed for his village. He was trying to defend its reputation, not to be stained forever by this incident, which he condemned. He condemned what Dominique Pelicot had done. And then he very suddenly started going, but of course, this whole thing's a bit overplayed, it's over-dramatized. I mean, she was unconscious, so she didn't actually experience any of this, really. She'll get over the trauma. There were no children affected, no one died. And I said, but seriously, you're minimizing this? And he said, absolutely, yes, I am. And I gave him another chance and another chance. I kept saying, are you really sure you want to say this? And he did. And I think that's not an uncommon view, particularly amongst a particular generation, perhaps in more rural areas, perhaps less amongst people who are perhaps more educated about these things, but it's certainly out there.
Well, Andrew and Laura, thank you for all your incredible hard work on this case, which must have been very difficult to cover. So we massively appreciate your time on Newscast tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Victoria, do you want to just have a last word? Because I know you spent your whole career covering stories where women have had to go through terrible things at the hands of men. I just wondered if you've got a final thought for us tonight.
Oh, gosh. Gisèle Pelicot has been so incredibly strong. And she has said in court that she wants women around the world to look at her and say, if Madame Pelicot can do it, then I can do it. But Stéphane Babineau, her lawyer, really he was sort of insistent to me, there is no right way to be if you have been through a horrific experience of rape. Whatever choices you make are the ones that are right for you. You don't have to be like Mrs. Pelicot. Just do what feels right for you.
Oh, Victoria, thank you very much, and look forward to watching you and listening to you on Newsnight in 2025.
See you soon. Bye. Thanks, Adam. Take care.
And thank you very much for listening to this episode of Newscast. If you've been affected by any of the issues that we've been discussing in this episode, then you can get help and support from the BBC Action Line. The web address for that is bbc.co.uk/Action Line. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. We will be on standby for any breaking news over the festive period, but we will be giving you some kind of look back at the year and the election and American politics and some reflections from the Newscast family about other stories that they've covered this year. And those episodes will be hitting your feed very soon. Bye-bye.